Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 27th and tonight's movie is The Devil's Backbone. Released in 2001, making it the oldest movie I'm watching this month, The Devil's Backbone is a Spanish-Mexican horror movie directed by Guillermo del Toro. He also directed Pan's Labyrinth and Crimson Peak, which I saw earlier this month. This is the third movie I've seen from the guy, and this one is also the weakest. It's not bad, it's just not as good as the other two movies. I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. The plot of The Devil's Backbone is that it is Spain during the Spanish Civil War, so it's a war-torn country, there's a lot of bad things happening, and there's this orphanage that's like in the middle of the desert, and this boy gets sent there after his dad dies in the war, and he wasn't even told that. In fact, he wasn't even told that he was being left there. They just sort of left him there and then drove off. He has a hard time getting adjusted because almost everybody else in the place is a jackass. Pretty much right when he gets there, he starts experiencing paranormal activity, seeing the ghosts of a little boy. Throughout the movie, he learns more about the orphanage and the people in it, and, just like in Pan's Labyrinth and Crimson Peak, learns that the supernatural stuff is the least of his worries. One good thing I want to say about this movie is that pretty much all the effects hold up very well. It's a good mix of practical effects and CG. There was only one effect that didn't look good, and it was like this fiery explosion that definitely did not look natural, but other than that, all the effects hold up. It obviously doesn't look nearly as polished as Pan's Labyrinth or especially Crimson Peak, but the aesthetic of the movie is pretty good. As usual, there's a lot of good shots, there's a lot of good visuals, and it knows how to flesh out its setting very well. I will say, though, that at least in the horror subgenre, Del Toro's movies are starting to feel a little bit formulaic. What you might have put together from me describing the plot is that it's pretty similar to the other two Del Toro movies I've seen. But Pan's Labyrinth had a really creative story, and Crimson Peak had amazing visuals. This movie doesn't really have either of those things. Once again, it's not bad at all, but a lot of it just makes you think of better movies I've seen from this director. However, when you look at it on its own, The Devil's Backbone is a decent horror movie. It's well executed, it has good atmosphere, the story is told well enough. It's just not anything really that special. One thing I will say is that the writing of the characters in this movie definitely seems like a big step down from Crimson Peak and especially Pan's Labyrinth. There are a lot of pretty hyperbolic bullies in this movie. And, like in Let Me In, those bullies were given almost no humanity and weren't interesting in the slightest. In Pan's Labyrinth, the main villain of the movie isn't even really a villain, he's just really misguided, and it was interesting. In Crimson Peak, the main villain is completely hyperbolic, almost cartoony, but it suits the style very well. In The Devil's Backbone, there isn't really much to the villain. He's just kind of a terrible person. By the way, the reason why this movie is called The Devil's Backbone is because the owner of the orphanage, this old man, he takes fetuses that had a specific birth defect, I think, called the Devil's Backbone, and then he puts them in big jugs of spiced rum and then sells it to superstitious idiots saying that's like a faith healing medicine. It's just so bizarrely horrible. Overall, I will say that The Devil's Backbone is mostly just average. If you want to get into Del Toro, I wouldn't recommend starting here. I would probably recommend starting with Pan's Labyrinth. But for what it is, it's not bad at all. If you like Del Toro's work, you'll probably like this movie just fine. Alright, now let's go into a few spoilers. It's revealed that in the orphanage, the people running it are stashing gold from the other side of the Spanish Civil War. They call them the Nationalists, and they call themselves Reds a few times. I looked it up, and apparently one of the sides in the Spanish Civil War had anarcho-communists in it. One of the caretakers, Jacinto, who's been at the orphanage for almost 15 years at that point, knows about this, and that's the main reason why he's staying, in order to get the gold and steal it. Now, something warish comes up, and everybody has to evacuate the orphanage and get out. And obviously this makes the caretaker very mad because he's still trying to get the gold, so he flips out and dumps a bunch of gasoline everywhere, blows stuff up, sets the whole thing on fire, and it also destroys the car that they had. And they are so far away from any other type of civilization, basically if they try to get there on foot, they'll be buzzard food by the end of the day. So they're all kind of stuck there. It's also revealed that that same caretaker killed one of the orphans in cold blood a little while back. That orphan, named Santi, ended up being the ghost boy that the main character had been seeing throughout the movie. The rest of the movie is basically just the caretaker and a couple of his friends trying to get at the gold, because even though they blew everything up, the gold wasn't in the safe, so they were looking for it. As it turns out, the owner's wife had a prosthetic leg and actually hid the gold in the leg. So the other two friends of the caretaker leave because they think he's just crazy, but he ends up finding the gold. But at that point, all the orphan boys want to fight back. So they make spears, and they even get a little bit of help from the ghosts. Not only of the little boy, but also the ghost of the orphanage's owner, who died from wounds from the explosion. He actually died sitting in a chair with a shotgun, waiting for the caretaker to come back, and he died getting eaten out by bugs. It was disgusting. This movie does deliver in a way that Crimson Peak didn't, whereas that while his death was mostly because of the orphans fighting back with spears, the finishing blow was dealt by the ghost, killing him exactly the same way that he killed the boy, by drowning him in this pool that they have in the basement for some reason. One thing they did that I liked was that they bookended the movie. The very beginning and the very end of the movie is this speech told by the owner of the orphanage. When you start out at the beginning, it's just this normal speech about what ghosts are and why they exist, but at the end, you realize it's the exact same speech, but you realize a lot of things were referenced throughout the movie in that speech. For example, the caretaker comes across an old picture of himself, and in that one his face is blurred because he moved. And at the very end, one of the lines in the speech is comparing ghosts to a blurred photograph. I thought that was a nice touch. In summation, The Devil's Backbone is creative and visually pleasing, which is to be expected from Guillermo del Toro, but it's not as creative or visually pleasing as some of his other movies. On its own, it's okay, but when compared to some of his other movies, The Devil's Backbone isn't really something to write home about. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow.